She had been sitting in the corner booth of Merchant and Salt for 2 hours and 47 minutes. When she realized the man she was waiting for had never intended to show up at all. Jolene Pruitt had known, on some level, from around the 90-minute mark. That was when the breadbasket went cold and Thomas, the young waiter who had been checking on her with increasingly painful expressions of pity, stopped asking if she'd like to order. He simply refreshed her water glass, in silence, the way you'd refresh the water of someone at a hospital bedside. Quiet, careful, like the kindness itself might break her. She had worn the burgundy dress. That was the detail that would haunt her later, riding home alone in the back of a cab with her mascara burning the corners of her eyes. The burgundy dress. She had ordered it 3 weeks ago from a boutique in Wicker Park whose owner, a small, warm woman named Gloria, had clapped her hands when Jolene stepped out of the dressing room and said, "Honey, that dress does not fit you. You fill it." And she had meant it as the highest compliment. Jolene had paid $420 for a dress that made her full hips and the soft, generous curve of her waist look not like something to hide, but like something deliberate, something chosen. She had worn control-top shapewear underneath it. She had skipped lunch. She had gotten her nails done at 7 in the morning, so they'd be dry by the time she walked through the doors of one of Boston's most coveted reservations. She had done all of it for a man named Callum Voss. They had matched on a high-end dating app 6 weeks ago. He had a square jaw and a wide, easy smile in his profile photos. The kind of smile that suggested he was comfortable in rooms most people felt nervous in. He had messaged her first. Not a one-liner, a full paragraph, referencing something specific from her profile. Her love of early 20th century architecture. The fact that she'd mentioned Hopper's Nighthawks in her bio. He had asked her what she thought the woman in the painting was thinking. She had typed back a 300-word answer at 11 at night, her feet tucked under her on the couch. And he had called her, actually called her, not texted, 20 minutes later to tell her it was the best answer he'd ever read. 6 weeks of good mornings, 6 weeks of late-night voice notes and shared Spotify playlists, and him saying, more than once, that he found women with actual substance rare, that he was tired of easy, that he wanted someone real, and then nothing. From the moment she had walked into Merchant and Salt at 7 p.m. and given the host his name, nothing. His phone went to voicemail after the first hour. After the second, her texts showed a single grey check. Not delivered. She had been blocked. Thomas appeared at her elbow. He had the check already prepared, tucked into a slim leather folder, and the way he set it gently on the table told her he'd been waiting for her to be ready to receive it. "Take your time," he said, and he meant it. Jolene reached for her purse. She pulled out her card and tucked it into the folder without looking at the total. She smoothed her dress over her thighs once, a habit, a nervous thing, and she told herself she was not going to cry. Not here, not in front of the couples at every other table, not in front of Thomas, not in the soft amber glow of a restaurant that had been designed specifically to make people feel romantic. She was gathering her coat from the hook on the wall of the booth when the front doors opened. She felt it before she saw it, a change in air pressure, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the November cold outside, the low hum of dinner conversation, silver on porcelain, the murmur of a wine recommendation, the small, careful laugh of a first date going well, died all at once, the way sound dies before a storm. Jolene looked up. 4 men in dark suits entered first. They weren't restaurant suits. They moved differently, economical, synchronized, their eyes sweeping the room in a pattern that spoke of training, of repetition, of rooms far more dangerous than this one. They fanned out along the perimeter of the dining room without speaking. Behind them walked a man who made the room feel small. He was tall, and the way he held himself, shoulders back, chin level, absolutely unhurried, made him seem taller still. His hair was dark with the first threads of silver at the temples. his jaw angular and clean-shaved, his suit the color of a late October sky just before dusk. He was not young, but he carried his age the way old buildings carry theirs, with an authority that only accumulates. His eyes, when they moved across the dining room, were a pale and particular grey, and they catalogued everything with the dispassionate efficiency of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by what he found. Jolene knew who he was. She suspected most people in Boston would, who didn't follow local news, or the federal court docket, or the long, baffling string of disappeared witnesses, without eventually arriving at the name Niall Beckett. He was the head of the Beckett Syndicate, a network that had its hands in the city's waterfront logistics, its private gambling, its most lucrative import routes. He had been indicted twice and walked both times, not because he was lucky, but because the men and women who testified against him had a troubling tendency to reconsider their recollections. The papers called him a businessman. People who knew better called him something else. One of his men stepped forward, his voice carried without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen, the restaurant is closing for a private function. You'll exit through the kitchen. Leave your meals. Do not use your phones." What happened next was not quite panic. It was something more orderly and more frightening than panic. Wealthy people, Jolene had noticed over the course of her career, were very good at complying efficiently when the situation warranted it. They rose from their tables without argument, tucking phones into pockets, exchanging one weighted look with a dinner partner before filing toward the swinging kitchen doors with the brisk, practiced composure of people who had lawyers on speed dial and preferred to deploy them from a safe distance. Within 90 seconds, the dining room was empty. Except for Jolene, who had not moved. She had meant to. She had stood up, coat half on, and her legs simply stopped. Some ancient mammalian circuit had looked at the man standing in the entrance of Merchant and Salt and made a unilateral decision that movement was inadvisable. Niall Beckett's grey eyes swept the room and found her immediately. He crossed the dining room without hurrying. His men stayed where they were. His footsteps were nearly silent on the polished floor. He stopped at her booth, and up close, the full weight of his presence landed on her like something physical. He smelled of cedar and cold air, and something underneath it, sharp and particular, that her body registered as danger in the most primal possible way. He looked at the two-place settings on the table, the untouched wineglass opposite her, the bread basket, long cold. Then he looked at her. "You're the bookkeeper," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was low and unhurried, a slight remnant of something coastal in the vowels. Maine, she would learn later, a long time ago. Jolene's mouth opened. "I'm what?" "The bookkeeper." He said it again with the patience of a man who rarely repeated himself and found the experience mildly interesting. He pulled out the chair across from her, the chair that had been empty for nearly 3 hours, and sat down. "Where is Callum Voss?" The name hit her like a flat stone. "Callum," she repeated. The word felt strange in her mouth, stripped of all its previous associations. "You know Callum?" Niall Beckett leaned back slightly in the chair, his large hands resting on the table with a stillness that was somehow more alarming than motion. "He worked for me," he said. "Handled my import records, off-ledger accounting, until 2 days ago, when I discovered approximately $3.2 million rerouted through a set of shell accounts I didn't authorize." He paused, just a beat. "His associates told me he was meeting his partner here tonight. His partner, according to him, was carrying a backup of the routing files." Jolene's mind worked very fast. She was good at patterns. It was, in fact, the thing she did for a living. She was a forensic accountant for a mid-sized compliance firm downtown. She spent her days looking at columns of numbers and finding the thing that didn't belong. And in the space of about 4 seconds, the pattern she was looking at now assembled itself with horrible clarity. Callum hadn't ghosted her. He had used her. He had set a visible, documented reservation at a well-known restaurant, given the location to men who were hunting him, and placed her there as the decoy, a woman waiting alone, drawing the eye, buying him time to cross a border or board a plane, or simply disappear into the enormous, indifferent dark of the country. He had used her as bait. The shock of it lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it was replaced by something that burned considerably hotter. "He set me up," Jolene said. She heard her own voice go very flat. Niall Beckett watched her. Something in his expression shifted, a fractional adjustment, like a man recalibrating in real time. "It would appear so. 6 weeks." Jolene set her hands on the table. They were shaking, she noticed, but not with fear anymore. 6 weeks of texts. He had a hole. He asked me about Edward Hopper. He called me on the phone. He said he'd been looking for someone like me. She stopped. She breathed. She looked directly at the man across from her, the most dangerous man she had ever been in a room with, and she said, "Do you know what's under this dress?" "Shapewear." "Do you know what I had for lunch today?" "Nothing, because I wanted to look, because he told me I was." She stopped again. She pressed her lips together hard. One of Beckett's men had moved closer. He was broad-shouldered with a scar bisecting his left brow, and he addressed Beckett in a low voice. "She's clean, boss." Civilian. "We're burning time here." Beckett did not look at him. He was still looking at Jolene, with that pale, assessing gaze that felt like being read rather than seen. "He knew you'd wait," Beckett said. That's what he counted on. The cruelty of it, stated that plainly, without softening, landed somewhere deep and precise. Jolene felt it like a pressure behind her sternum. He had known she would wait. He had built his whole calculation on the certainty that she would sit alone in a restaurant for hours rather than leave. Because women who looked like her, women who had been told for 31 years that they should be grateful for whatever attention arrived, didn't walk out. They waited. "He told me," Jolene said quietly, "that he'd never met a woman worth staying for, that most women were too easy to read." She reached into her purse and set her work badge on the table. "I'm a forensic accountant. I look for financial fraud for a living, and I got played by a man who was apparently doing financial fraud for your living." She looked up. "I don't have your money. I don't have any files. I have a maxed-out Amex and a dress I will probably never wear again." Niall Beckett looked at the badge. He picked it up, examined it, and set it back down. Then he did something she did not expect. He was quiet for a long moment, and in the quiet, the hard, evaluating expression on his face shifted into something that was not quite warmth, but was its distant cousin. "Forensic accountant," he said. "Compliance specialist. Mercer and Hall. I've been there 4 years." She paused. "I'm good at it. I don't doubt that." He leaned forward very slightly. "Voss named you as his partner to my associates, specifically. He gave your name and your physical description. He knew my men would find you here instead of him." "Because I was a credible placeholder," Jolene said, and she heard the bitterness in it. "A heavy woman sitting alone at a fancy restaurant looks exactly like someone waiting for something she's not sure she deserves. No one looks twice." He counted on that too. The scarred man took a step forward. "Boss, we need to move." Beckett raised one hand, a slight gesture, no more than an inch of motion, and the man went still. "Miss Pruitt," Beckett said. She had not given her last name. He had read it off the badge. "Callum Voss told my associates that the backup of my financial records was being held by his partner. A digital file. Did he send you anything in the last 48 hours? A link, a file, an attachment you may not have opened." Jolene's brow furrowed, she thought. She pulled out her phone. There had been a message. 4 days ago, not 2, before the silence started. Callum had sent her a link to what he described as a private playlist he'd made for their date. Songs for the Night, he'd called it. She had clicked it and gotten an error message, assumed it was a broken link, moved on. She had been too delighted by the gesture to be suspicious of the malfunction. She opened her messages. She found the link. She tilted her phone toward Beckett. "This," she said. He looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, or the beginning of certainty. He turned to the scarred man. "Get Crane up here with the extraction kit." The man moved without a word. Beckett looked back at Jolene, and the air between them had changed in a way she could feel but not exactly name. He was still looking at her like she was a problem being solved. But underneath it now was something else. A particular attention. The kind that didn't feel like assessment anymore. "You can't go home tonight," he said. "I'm sorry." Voss told the men he owed money to. Not my men, other men. Men he was planning to sell my ledgers to, that his partner would be here. When they find out the meeting didn't happen, they'll assume the partner has the files. They'll look for you. They will not be gentle about it. Jolene stared at him. "I can call the police." Niall Beckett's expression didn't change. "You could," he said. "3 of the 4 detectives who would catch that call are on my payroll. The 4th is on retainer for the family Voss was planning to sell to. I'd estimate that call gets you approximately nothing, and significantly complicates the next 48 hours of your life." "This is insane," Jolene said. "I went on a date." "You went on a date with a man who has stolen from 2 organizations simultaneously and used your presence to buy his exit." He stood, and despite herself, she stood too, her body making the decision before her mind caught up. "You have 2 options. You walk out that door alone tonight, and you hope that no one who's looking for Callum Voss decides you're the next best lead. Or you come with me, and I guarantee that no one will touch you." "Why would you guarantee me anything?" she said. "You don't know me." "No," Beckett said. "But I know Voss, and I know what he did in choosing you." Something in his face went still and precise. He chose a woman he assumed would be too frightened to fight back, too grateful to question him, too accustomed to being overlooked to notice she was being handled. He held her gaze. He chose wrong. The deadbolts on the front doors were thrown open by one of his men. Outside, a black SUV idled at the curb, rain beginning to pattern the windows. Beckett extended his hand. Jolene Pruett, forensic accountant, sat with the choice for exactly 4 seconds. She thought about the empty plate across from her, and the cold bread basket, and the particular cruelty of waiting for someone who had already decided. She was nothing but a prop. She thought about the burgundy dress, and the $420, and the shapewear, and the skipped lunch. She thought about Thomas the waiter, and his careful, pitying silences. Then she took Niall Beckett's hand. The penthouse was not what she expected, and she wasn't sure what she had expected. Something theatrical, perhaps, all dark wood and taxidermy and visible weaponry. Instead it was spare and almost austere. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the south wall gave a clear view of the harbour, the water black and restless under the November clouds. The furniture was expensive and undecorated. The only art on the walls was a large format photograph of the Boston skyline taken from the water, and it looked less like a vanity piece than like something a man kept to remind himself where he'd come from. She sat on a long grey sofa and accepted the glass of bourbon Beckett poured without comment, because her hands were still shaking slightly, and her nervous system had run out of other suggestions. A woman in a dark jacket arrived within 20 minutes, with a laptop and a small external device that looked like nothing Jolene had ever seen in a consumer electronics store. She was introduced only as Crane. She took Jolene's phone, worked on it for 11 minutes, and placed it back on the coffee table with a quiet, satisfied nod to Beckett. "It's all there," Crane said. "Rating tables, Shell Corporation registries, bearer bond numbers." He embedded the whole thing inside the playlist file as a split archive. 48 hours after she opened the link, it would have auto-forwarded to a receiver address registered to the Fallon network. She paused. She stopped the transfer just by not opening it on a Wi-Fi connection. Beckett stood very still. Then he looked at Jolene. "You accidentally protected $3.2 million of my assets," he said, "by having a weak cell signal." I was in an Uber, Jolene said. The tunnel on the 93 kills my connection every time. Something happened to Niall Beckett's face then. It was not a smile exactly, but it was the scaffolding of one. A fractional easing at the corners of his eyes. A quality of expression that she suspected very few people ever saw. Crane, he said, without looking away from Jolene. Find Voss. Crane left. The elevator doors closed. The penthouse was quiet. Beckett sat down in the chair across from her. Not close, not crowding, maintaining a careful, deliberate distance, and studied her the way she'd noticed him study everything. Comprehensively, without embarrassment about the attention. "You're not afraid," he said. It sounded less like a compliment than an observation he found puzzling. "I'm absolutely afraid," Jolene said. "I'm also furious, and the furious is winning right now." She held the bourbon glass in both hands. "He sent me that playlist link, and I thought it was sweet. I thought it meant he was thinking about the date. I saved it to listen to later, because I didn't want to listen on headphones while I was still putting on my makeup. I wanted to save it for the cab ride over. And then I forgot to open it because my phone was down to 8% and I was managing the battery." She stopped. He planned it perfectly. Every detail designed for someone who would wait and be distracted and not ask too many questions. "But you would have asked questions," Beckett said. "Eventually." "Yes." She looked at him. "That's what I do. I find the thing that doesn't add up." He was quiet for a moment. "What doesn't add up, in what you know so far?" It was a strange question to be asked by the man who ran half of Boston's criminal infrastructure while sitting in his penthouse at midnight. It was also, she realized, a genuine one. He wanted her actual answer. "He overcomplicated it," she said. "If he just wanted a decoy at a restaurant, he didn't need 6 weeks. 2 weeks would have been enough to establish a credible paper trail. 6 weeks was excessive. Which means either he couldn't move faster, something was holding him in place, or the 6 weeks wasn't just for the decoy, it was for something else. Beckett looked at her for a long moment. "Such as access," Jolene said. "Did he ever ask you about me? Before tonight?" The stillness in Beckett's face became a different kind of stillness. "He mentioned," Beckett said slowly, "approximately 3 weeks ago, that he had a contact at a compliance firm. He suggested we might use a legitimate auditor to provide cover for some of the import documentation. And you said no. I said I'd consider it. He was building a second exit," Jolene said. "If the digital transfer failed, he had a human being with forensic credentials who could be maneuvered into handling the documents. Me, a legitimate cover story, fully deniable, sitting right there in the corner booth wearing a burgundy dress and waiting for a man who was never going to show up." The silence in the room was absolute. Then Beckett said very quietly, "He spent 6 weeks building a woman into a contingency plan." "He spent 6 weeks," Jolene said, "making me feel like I was the plan, like I was the thing someone was working toward." She set the bourbon glass down. "That is genuinely the cruelest part." At 2 in the morning, her phone lit up on the coffee table. Unknown number. She and Beckett looked at it at the same moment. She answered. She put it on speaker. "Jolene." Callum's voice was tight and thin, the easy charm completely stripped out of it. "Tell me you still have the phone I gave you." "I use my own phone, Callum." "The playlist." "Did you open it? Tell me it's still there." Jolene leaned back against the sofa. "I actually never got around to listening to it. The file gave me an error message and I forgot about it." She let a beat pass. "Why? Is it important?" She heard him exhale, fast and desperate. "I need that file, Joe. You have no idea what kind of people I'm dealing with. Just bring your phone to me. I'll explain everything." "You could have explained everything at dinner," she said, "or on any of the 47 phone calls we had in the last 6 weeks. You had options, Jolene." His voice cracked, and she heard the thing underneath. Not remorse, she realized. Panic. Pure, undecorated panic. "You don't understand. These people will kill me." "Which people, Callum?" Listen, it doesn't matter. Meet me. The old Harbour Wall building on Dry Dock Avenue. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. Just bring the phone and I swear I will make all of this right. Jolene said nothing for a moment. Across the coffee table, Beckett was watching her. His pale eyes were unreadable, but he gave her the smallest nod. You know what the worst part is? Jolene said into the phone. Not the standing up. Not even the fact that you apparently embedded stolen financial records into a fake Spotify playlist and sent it to my phone. She paused. It's the 6 weeks of good mornings. That's the part that's going to take a while. Callum's voice shifted. The panic cracked open, and underneath it was contempt, thin and cold and real. Are you actually going to lecture me right now? Just bring me the phone. I picked you because you were safe and forgettable, and you wouldn't ask questions. That's it. That's the whole reason. Now do something useful for once in your life, and bring me the phone. Jolene ended the call. She set the phone on the table. She did not speak. Niall Beckett rose from his chair. He crossed to the window and stood looking out at the harbour for a moment, his back to her. Then he turned, and the expression on his face was the quietest and most terrifying thing she had seen all night. Crane, he said into the air, and his earpiece clicked. Dry Dock Avenue, Harbour Wool Building. Take the South team. He crossed back to the sofa. He stopped in front of her and looked down at her for a moment, and she did not look away. I'd like you to come, he said. You don't have to, but I think you might want to. Jolene stood up. She smoothed her dress. She picked up her coat. Let's go. The Harbour Wool Building sat on the waterfront like a body the city had decided not to bury yet. Enormous brick-red windows, long since boarded over, its loading dock facing a flat black stretch of harbour water that smelled of diesel and cold salt, and the kind of history that doesn't get put on plaques. A thin November rain had started. Jolene stood on the dock in the burgundy dress, with Beckett's overcoat draped over her shoulders. He had put it there without ceremony when they stepped out of the SUV, a single smooth gesture, and the coat was heavy and warm and smelled of cedar, and she felt, improbably, completely safe. Jolene! Callum came out from behind a rusted cargo container. He looked like what he was, a man who had been running for 2 days on no sleep and pure adrenaline, his carefully constructed surface completely dissolved. He had a gun that he was holding with both hands because one wasn't steady enough. Give me the phone. She didn't reach for her purse. You picked me, she said, because I was safe and forgettable. Jolene, I've been thinking about that word, forgettable. She tilted her head. I've been called a lot of things. I've been the girl who wasn't quite right for rooms like that restaurant. I've been the one people talk over in meetings. I have a Bumble profile that I've rewritten 17 times trying to find the version of myself that sounds like someone worth choosing. She stopped. And you thought that made me a good mark, that all that practice at being overlooked would make me easy. Give me the phone. His voice was fraying. I will shoot you, I swear to God. No, said a voice from directly behind him. You won't. Callum spun. Niall Beckett stepped out of the dark in his shirt sleeves. The November rain beginning to pattern his shoulders, flanked by 2 men whose faces were entirely expressionless. From the far end of the dock, more figures emerged from the fog, the geometry of it making escape an arithmetic impossibility. Callum's gun hand dropped. His knees went next. Beckett walked past him. He walked to Jolene and turned so that they were both facing Callum, and he put his hand on the small of her back, one steady, unhurried hand, and the weight of it was exactly as deliberate as everything else he did. Miss Pruitt, he said, without looking at her, his eyes on Callum. This is your call. Callum looked between them. The blood had left his face entirely. You, Jolene, you called. You're with. She's with me, Beckett said simply. Jolene looked at Callum Voss. She looked at the man who had learned her coffee order and her favorite paintings and the particular frequency of her loneliness, and had used every piece of it as raw material. The man who had told her she was real and soft and rare, and had meant none of it, had filed it all away as utility, the man who had called her forgettable. She thought about the burgundy dress, about Gloria in the boutique saying you fill it, like that was the most obvious and true thing in the world. She thought about the $420, about Thomas with his careful, pitying silences, about 31 years of making herself smaller in rooms that hadn't asked her to, but hadn't told her not to either. She looked at Callum one more time. "You're a coward," she said pleasantly, the way you'd say have a nice evening, "and you miscalculated." She turned to Beckett. "I'm done here." Beckett nodded. He said something to his men in a low voice that she didn't catch, and then he put his hand back on the small of her back and guided her toward the car, and behind them she heard Callum start to say something, a plea, or an explanation, or another lie, and then she heard the sound of the dock and the water and the rain, and nothing else. In the car on the way back, they didn't speak for a long time. The city moved past the rain-streaked windows. Jolene looked at her reflection in the glass and tried to locate the version of herself that had walked into Merchant and Salt at 7 p.m. in the burgundy dress, full of careful hope and shapewear and a skipped lunch, and found that she couldn't quite find her anymore. She was, she realized, entirely unbothered by this. "I want the files removed from my phone," she said. "They already are," Beckett said. "I want documentation that I wasn't a willing party to any of what Voss was doing." "You'll have it by morning." "And I want to know," she said, turning from the window to look at him, "what you're going to do with whatever he was keeping in those ledgers. Because if any of it touches my firm or my license, I will find the discrepancy. I always find the discrepancy." Niall Beckett looked at her for a moment in the dim, rain-shadowed interior of the car, and then, slowly, the scaffolding of the not-quite smile returned. It reached his eyes this time. "I know," he said. "When she got home at 4 in the morning and changed out of the burgundy dress, she hung it up rather than leaving it on the floor. She smoothed the fabric carefully over the hanger, the way you handle something you intend to keep." Gloria had been right. She filled it. She had always filled it. She just hadn't known yet that filling a room was the same as owning it.